Welcome, everybody, to the interview room. Man, oh man, have we got a very special, and I'm talking very special, program for you tonight. We have the Godfather of Homicide, and that is no understatement, let me tell you. We have Lieutenant Commander Vernon Geberth here, who is the author of this book in its 5th edition. It is the Practical Homicide Homicide Investigation Manual, which is now in its 5th edition, as I've mentioned. And by the way, he's also the author of many sex-related homicide books and death investigations. He is world renowned. And I'm not just talking the United States world renowned, I'm talking the world renowned. I've met 2 people in my life now. One of them, as you know, was from LAPD, and then there's Lieutenant Commander Vernon Geberth from NYPD. He has literally written the Bible on homicide investigation around the world, and he's taught tens of thousands of investigators, and he has worked literally 8 to 10,000 murders in his own time. So that's Mr. Lieutenant Commander Vernon Geberth. Vernon, welcome to the interview room tonight. So great to have you.
Thank you, Chris. It's a pleasure. And my pronunciation of my name is Geberth. Geb and Earth.
Geberth. Okay, well, see, there's my first mistake.
No, it's just that I don't want it like I gave birth or anything. You know, it's Geberth.
I love it. Well, thank you for definitely correcting me. And also batting second here is also very world-renowned, Dr. Gary Brucato. We all know him. He has the largest research database of mass homicides in the world, approximately 119 years of data, Gary. And he is not only a scholar, but he's worked with Columbia University, and of course, he's also a part of the Cold Case Foundation. And so most recently, Vernon came on board. So, man, oh man, are we just growing and growing out of 167 now, probably the best in the world. And adding Lieutenant Commander on top here is just a really great thing. So, Gary, thank you so much for being here. And thank you for setting this up with NYPD here.
Well, thank you.
Well,
thank you.
Vernon and I had we were introduced at the time that I was doing The New Evil with Michael Stone, who of course now has passed away. And the idea was I wanted to add a kind of gravitas to the book by having experts review it and tell us if it was any good before this book went out there, because I knew that it was going to have an impact on everything from clinicians doing forensic work like myself, or people working with law enforcement, members of law enforcement, etc. And at the time, Vernon reviewed it and thought highly of it and so forth. And then we wound up staying in touch. And now he's a member of the foundation. So
with a high recommendation, Doctor. Don't forget, I was really impressed. I hadn't seen
which is a great rarity.
I hadn't seen that collection of data in a long time.
Yeah, yeah. I remember you were because one thing you learn right away about Vernon is he knows his research, and he makes sure that you cite things and you're appropriate in terms of telling people where you got your data and all that. He's very rigorous, and I think he was happy to see that everything we were saying was rooted in firm research. In fact, one of the things I most love about Vernon's history is how everything he did was research. He was doing, constantly research. Let's try hypnosis today to see if it actually works. That kind of thing. You know what I'm talking about, Vernon? You
Yeah,
turned everything into research.
And the truth of the matter is, in the NYPD, you better be a good documenter, because documentation could save your life. You gotta know what you're doing. You gotta make sure you document, because some snake will get you if you don't.
All right. Well, you definitely did, but I love the way that you had that kind of Sherlockian quality of everything being science and learning from it, and even the way that you were keeping photos and the way you keep things associated with certain offenses so they could be studied and all of that is very important. You've created quite a research archive, and but we'll get into that. But the research master, so he appreciated that. And of course, so many of us, for example, Ann Burgess, a member of our foundation, so many of us, our books and writing have been helped by Vernon. I mean, Vernon, you were the editor of CRC Press's series, right? That sort of.
Yes, I edited 65 books in that series.
Wow.
But I made sure they were practitioners and not academics. Okay, I want to make sure you knew what you were talking about.
Yeah.
That's right.
And
That's
how
right. So a lot of
important
people
is
got
that?
their start. And of course, Vernon also, Chris, one thing I'll add to his intro is people forget Vernon published the first ever article on profiling.
Yes, he did.
Yeah, 1981.
Yep.
That's right.
And
What a background.
a year before I started in 82.
Ah, okay.
And
Well, at the time, I thought it was a good tool, and I thought it should be shared. And one of the muckety mucks at the FBI didn't think it should be shared. He wanted to keep it to himself. I said, "You can't keep this to yourself. It's a tool." Then about 2 years later, he was on television doing the same thing. So I said, "Well, I guess
Go figure.
I guess it's available now."
Go figure. Well, again, it's such an honor to have you here. And I'm going to lay some foundation here for a moment for our audience. Everybody, this is the Godfather of Homicide, and he's a cop's cop. It's the second edition, and in this particular book, you're going to learn all about his life. I mean, it's a fascinating read. I in full transparency, I'm like halfway through it, to be honest with you, because I've had it only 4 or 5 days now. So I haven't completed it yet, but I can tell you what, I'm glued to it. And our audience, if you go down in the link below, you'll be able to get this book on Amazon. And again, this is a great, great read. You got to grab it. And then if you're a homicide investigator or an investigator just listening, here's the Bible right here. And you can tell I've used it many, many times in my own career. There is everything, any question you want answered as a cop, and especially as a new homicide guy. If you never had a chance to get to one of his classes, and I was one of those that never had that chance in my career, this was is the next best thing. So you can go out and order this too. The links will be there. And I was just recently in a trial where I referred to your book and actually held it up because I carried it into the courtroom. And the defense was like, "Well, where are you getting that information?" I said, "Page, whatever it was." And they were like, "Oh, okay. There you go." So
that's interesting. That's interesting because during the O.J. Simpson trial, they were both using my book, the defense and the prosecution. And I was really, really upset by the defense using my book because they didn't know what they were talking about. I got so aggravated that at the conclusion of the trial, I did the third edition and put everything in there that showed that O.J. did it. So I'm a homicide cop. I don't get mad. I get even.
That's right. That's right.
Right. That's hilarious.
Well, first of all, I have to lay the foundation for our families and why our families are so important when you're a homicide guy. And so, Vernon, my first question for you, and I think the audience will also want to know, is obviously you married way up. It's I mean, you just don't spend as much time and as have as much knowledge as you do, and you've shared that knowledge because, you know, what's the old saying? No gift has any value unless you give it away.
True.
And
And if you have to share, if you have something, you should share it. That's the whole idea.
right. And so God sent you an angel. Tell us about your sweetheart.
I married my childhood sweetheart. I went to her sweet 16th birthday party and I said, I'm going to marry you because you're nuts. And we've been together for over 60 years. We just celebrated our 60th wedding anniversary.
Congratulations.
But, you know, it's funny because you're young. You know, I was a lifeguard. You know, lifeguard is a dangerous job because all those beautiful girls are walking around. They think you're a hero. The truth of the matter was
tough to
being a lifeguard, you know, every once in a while I'd look the wrong way and my girlfriend saying, no. Anyway, we got married young. We were very young when we got married and we grew together. It's amazing. I left college to join the NYPD. That was my vocation. I wanted to be an NYPD cop. And basically I left college in my third year. I also planned to get married. And in the interim, I was a New York World's Fair police officer. So that was kind of interesting because the New York World's Fair Police Department was based on the NYPD, and all of the officers and commanders were NYPD. And the word was, listen, kid, if you don't screw up, you might get the real job. So I had a good education, and we got married in October of '64. And we came back for our honeymoon. I found out I was laid off from World's Fair Police Department. Now I'm 1A. I'm up for the draft because I had signed up for the PLTC, the Marine Corps program. Yeah. And so now for my first time since I was 12 years old, I don't have a job. I can't believe this. I always had a job. So I scrambled around. I drove a cab. I unloaded trucks. I shoveled snow. You name it, I did it. I have no ego when it comes to work. As luck would have it, it was the holiday season and UPS was hiring. So I went to UPS. So you had to be there early in the morning, shape up, and if you were lucky, they would pick you as a help. If you weren't lucky, you went home. So I showed up at 3 few mornings. Nobody picked me because they didn't know me. And all of a sudden, the guy picked me. Next thing you know, I'm a regular worker. They give me my own truck, my own route, and wow. I'm a UPS guy. I'm a driver.
That was a union gig, right? Back then.
Well, it was a union, but we were temporary. What do you call Christmas workers?
Christmas workers.
Yeah, and basically at the end of the season, they got rid of everybody except 5 people, and I was one of the 5 they kept. And when they found out I had a college education, 3 years, they sent me to UPS management school. So I didn't say nothing because I'm still waiting for the NYPD. And what happened is all of a sudden I got recalled to the World's Fair. They made me a sergeant because I had a good reputation. They put me in charge of liquor license inspections. I knew nothing about liquor license inspections, but I guess they couldn't trust anybody else. So they used a kid. So I went around and I inspected everybody. And I was amazed at how many bars they had at the New York World's Fair. Every pavilion had a private bar for their special people. So I got to see that. It was neat. And then I got called to the NYPD and off I went. 1965, April 30th.
And you haven't looked back.
Oh, I look back. What am I? I look forward. I look back. Look, would I want to I'm sorry, Gary. Would I want to repeat the Police Academy? No.
Sometimes it goes in and out. And I don't know but one of the things I liked about Vernon's book was that it drove home how everything that he did in his life, including as a kid, became useful when he was investigating homicides later. So, for example, in 1980, he deals with a case of a little girl, a 14-year-old girl who's been sexually assaulted multiple times, stabbed, left for dead on a rooftop.
Yeah, wow.
And she was a newspaper delivery girl. So he knew from his history delivering newspapers how she probably squirreled up there, got herself in the building, and how the guy would have waited for her. and it led to the discovery. Remember, Vernon, it was your background that made it
Yeah,
possible to figure
we
out
came up with the secondary crime scene, which was very important because when you deliver papers as a kid, you walk up from one side, you cross over the roof, you come down the other side. I had done that for years as a paper boy. And they showed me the crime scene. This doesn't make any sense. So I walked the building and I said, no, this is where it really happened. This is the secondary crime scene. That's where we found the physical evidence.
Wow.
And that was very. I felt so sorry for that little girl. Hey, here she is getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning to deliver papers. Her and her brother, good students, doing everything right, and some animal is waiting in the hallway for her. Yeah, we got him.
Yeah.
We got him.
Dovetailing into this thought process here. I mean, you've obviously worked thousands of murders in your career. One question I'm real curious to ask is what was the most gratifying part of your career path, and what inspired you, to kind of when I look back and I see guys like you who are mentors for tens of thousands of investigators, and to have this opportunity, to tap into your mind and ask myself, okay, well, what was gratifying for me, but then do a comparative analysis as whether I'm off base or am I on track, based on your track record and your experience levels. What was the most gratifying part for you?
Well, I think the most gratifying part is trying to bring closure to the families because they don't get justice. It's terrible. I felt really good when we got the murderer and we got the killer. It'll never bring the loved one back, but it's important that they know that the person that did this harm to their family is in jail. Now, what's going on currently across the country? Nobody goes to jail anymore. All right. There's some sort of social justice crap about trying to resurrect evil. You can't resurrect evil's evil. No, it belongs in a can. We try to keep the top on.
Yeah.
But I always had an expression, and I used it, and I gave these across the country. We work for God. I had these placards made up. I've given out 90,000 of those in my career across the country and the world. And if you look at homicide cops, you'll see that in their booth. Like there's a program called First 48, and they talk to police officers. And it gives me such a great feeling when I look and I see my plaque in their cubicle. We work for God. And I use that expression because when you look at the unacceptable, the evil, you got to say to yourself, what is this all about? Well, we're the good guys. We work for God. They're the bad guys. They work for the devil. Let's get them. That's where it's coming from.
And how does divinity play? What role does divinity play in guiding a homicide investigator? I can tell you in my own personal life, I would go off and have my own, prayer devotional, and then I'd go to work and I would listen.
Hey, listen, I go to church every Sunday. I go to church every religious day. I pray at night. I pray for everything. I pray for my children, my grandchildren, pray for the country. I pray for police officers because they're our last line. They're the last line of defense, and they're out there. And it's a young person's job, and that's what's so scary. Young people don't want this job under the current situation because of all this George Floyd, off the wall, cops are the bad guy stuff, makes their job impossible. At least I came in when you could do the job. Yeah. And I was a tactical patrol force cop. You don't make anything better than that.
Right. That was early in your career too.
Absolutely.
And I read
right
all
out of the academy. They took me right out of the academy, which is an honor. I was the shortest guy there because you had to be big, but they must have liked my marks or something anyway.
Well, and it's a different way of thinking. Tell the audience about, the tactical thinking versus the analytical thinking. I mean, everybody thinks, cops are cops. Well, that's not the case, is it? Meaning,
no, we were in training constantly. Unlike the average police officer who was turned out from the police academy, went on patrol, on the job training. Okay, we were constantly being trained. We were being trained for riot control, for high crime areas, narcotics interdiction. you name it, we were getting training, building, rappelling. It was something. It was fantastic for a young guy, because it was like, wow, this is neat. I'm doing is police work. I'm not doing 80 cases. I'm not doing traffic control. I'm doing police work, which I signed up to do. And as a result, being a TPF cop, okay, I got to be a detective very early in my career without knowing anybody. And that's big. No, we were doing building assaults. A lot of these buildings were abandoned on the outside. They looked like they were abandoned, but they were occupied by bad guys, by gangbangers, etc., drug people. And the buildings were insulated against the police. They would take out a level of when you run into a building, you go up the stairs. They would take out a level on the third or fourth level. There's no level. You get there, you go right down to the basement and land on spikes.
They took the landing off?
They took the landing off because when they knew the police would chase them. So when they got to that floor, they grabbed onto the bolster, swung around, and continued onto the roof to get away. If we weren't aware of that, we would go right down to a death, possible injury, possible death. It was really, it was like guerrilla warfare. It was really nuts. But I would come home at night and tell my wife stories. I mean, it was funny. Later on, when my son followed me into police service, he'd wake up his mother and tell her stories too. So I guess she was the godmother.
Is your son still a member right today?
I'm sorry?
Is your son still a member of the department today?
No, I'm very old. He's retired already. I got two grandsons in the business. And,
no kidding.
Well, that's why I do extra praying.
Oh man.
Wow. I didn't know that part. I didn't know you had two grandkids that were
yes. Yeah, it was two of my sons went into service. One went into the NYPD. The other went into the New York State Police. And that's because I wouldn't let two brothers go into the same job. And from my way of thinking, what I saw from the way other people acted, they're always comparing one brother to the other. And God forbid you had a father like me, all right, that was doing all this stuff. It added pressure. So the second guy went into the New York State Police, and he became an investigator also, but he wasn't subject to the sins of the father, so to speak. So, because I didn't take any prisoners, I didn't take any shit, because when you're right, you're right. And there were some bosses that were really, really terrible to work for. And Gary, you read the book, so you know who I'm talking about.
No, I finished it, the page to cover. But I'll tell you, one of the things that I got a sense of as I was reading it is that whatever you were doing as you were moving up through your career, and then ultimately wound up a consultant on homicides all over the world, right? Is that it's very clear that you had a natural intuition that made you think a little differently than the average person who was investigating homicide. So that you always were the one who said, let's look at it this way, right? And you're not thinking of it right. And so that it's interesting, because you really get the sense that it was experience that taught you all of the screw ups that ultimately affect crime scenes and the ways that people look at cases, so that you wind up with this checklist that can be used. And if you do it right the first time, you don't have a problem, but you only get one chance, right? So that I think so I was hoping you would talk a little bit about the seeds of the ideas that became your homicide investigation theories, right? In other words, where did they come from? What experiences did you have that led you? Because you must have seen a lot of buffoonery that led you to learn.
Well, something. I looked at each assignment as a learning experience, and if you're smart, you carry those learning experiences into the next assignment. Because, for instance, I don't think you can be a very good homicide cop without spending time rolling around the street with the druggies. Narcotics was an education, because in narcotics, everybody's lying. Everybody's lying. If you can figure out the kernel of truth within that lie, you're doing a good thing. So by the time you get into homicide, you have a pretty good sense of human behavior, criminal behavior, and some of the stuff that goes on. And it helps. Now, again, each assignment requires a different expertise and experience. And so I would try to be the best I could in each assignment. And as I went out, and once I became a boss, once I became a sergeant, I made sure that I treated my people the way I wanted to be treated when I wasn't. Okay, it's important, because if you don't have good men and you don't surround yourself with good people, you're doing yourself a disservice. If you're one of these Dudley do-right, straight by the book, everything's done, you're not going to get it. You're not going to get people to follow you. People want to follow a leader. The leader is someone who stands up and they know this guy is going to be with them right through the episode. And that's the kind of thing I did as a boss. And by the time I became a commander, I had a good reputation. The thing is, though, when you do that, you're going to make other type of enemies from headquarters. People are going to get upset because they see the troops are following you and listening to you, and they're not listening to them. No, we're listening, but you're not getting the message. We're telling you this does not work, okay, in the street. What you theorized to be a good tactic does not work, or you get somebody hurt. And that's the way I conducted myself. And when I went to homicide, I was thrilled to finally get out of narcotics. I had enough of the drugs.
Yeah.
I finally got the homicide. I was smart enough when I got there as a boss not to start telling people what to do. I had guys with 30, 40 years on the job. I'm going to tell them how to do their job?
Right.
Of course not. What I did, I had been an investigator, I had been a supervisor, and over the years, you get to see a lot of different people. You meet people, you learn about things. First thing I did was I said, I got to learn all over again. This is a whole different process. This is not narcotics. This is homicide. And so what I did is I kind of identified who I thought were the stars. And I said, listen, by the way, I'm going to be hanging out with you guys. Oh, boss, give us a break. We don't need. I said, no, not to tell you what to do. I want to see what you do. I want to learn. I'd ask questions. And every time I saw something good, I wrote it down. Ironically, those notes, those checklist and field guide became the nucleus of practical homicide investigation.
Right.
I learned from the best, and I made sure I congratulated. And when something was good, I made them all sit down. Let's share this. I don't want to tell them how I did it. What are you, crazy? They'll be as smart as me. I said, if you were smart, you wouldn't be in the police department, for Christ's sake. We're a team.
That is so true. Everything you've just said. I mean, it's fascinating because I've shared with Gary a while ago, the first time I had an opportunity to see Jigsaw John. He was retiring actually within like 3 years.
A legend.
He's like you. I mean, you guys are cut from the same cloth. I mean, literally that. But I was at a CHIA conference, a California Homicide Investigators Association conference, and he was sitting off, just minding his own business. And I thought, okay, this is the only opportunity I'm going to get to talk to this guy, to learn from him. And I went up and I sat next to him and introduced myself as, some potato chip in a very small bag in another agency. And he literally, we got to the place where I said, sir, can I ask you a question? And he says, yeah. I said, what kind of advice would you give to, a new guy here? What is there anything that, you would help me out with? And literally he looked at me, Vernon, and he looked right in my eyes and he said, okay, I'm going to ask you one question. I said, I'm all ears. And he goes, are you teachable? Right.
Well, that was a good question.
And man, that resonated with me. And at first, my ego got in the way, and I in my head, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, how am I going to answer this? And I finally got the courage to say, yes, I am teachable. And he says, okay, I'll help you out. And he gave me some advice. And
you got to keep in mind that we don't have all the answers. All right. We're learning something every day. Even here in my retirement, I'm picking up information. I was thrilled to do the work with Gary on his book because it really invigorated me to get back into a subject I have been away from, because when they started with the woke crap, yeah. I wasn't going to start teaching anymore because I knew better. They could undo 50 years of experience and professionalism in 15 minutes online. I said, I'm not going to let that happen to me. Okay. I have too much respect for the profession.
Again, to the audience, make sure you get the link below and get this book, because it really is a fascinating read. And, you need to have it in your library, especially.
I finished it pretty fast, to be honest, because I like the anecdotes, especially about cases. I learned some things, but Vernon, it isn't only that you learned from the people who were doing things right. You also learn from the screw ups, because
absolutely
right, because you ultimately create a list that if you adhere to it, you'll prevent messing up. And as I think is really important. I mean, I thought it would be interesting if you could talk, for example, about a couple of situations where you went in and you could see right away that a crime scene has been botched, because I can't imagine anything bothers you more than a crime scene that's been blown, from the beginning. And so maybe, I mean, Chris, is that all right if
Oh
Vernon
yeah,
talks about
no.
that?
In fact, that
Because
was
I think
question
that's
number
interesting
2 here.
stuff. I mean,
We're clicking here.
Well, I'll give you an example. When I first came to the 7th Division, 7th Homicide Division, it's like the 7th Cavalry. You're under attack. We're in the South Bronx. It's 6 square miles, 225 homicides a year. It's
Wow.
nonstop murder and mayhem. But we had a major case involving this little boy who was brought into an abandoned building by a sexual pervert, was assaulted and killed. And I was the duty sergeant, and I went to the scene. I was so upset by the way they were handling the scene that I began to make noise, which is not a good thing to do, because then other people say, who's this new guy making all noise? And I'm saying, this is no way to handle this. What about this? What about this? So the lieutenant says, oh, okay, you're so smart, then you'll be in charge of it. And I said, well, first thing we'll do, I want these guys out of here. All right. I want some real detectives, and we're going to go back and try to resurrect this. And it wasn't that I was smarter than them. It's just that I had learned from the other people what you're supposed to do. And there was no concept of evidence in this thing. It was like, we're just going to handle body, 1, 2, 3. And it was interesting. I got my way eventually. It was funny because some of the crime scene people, they would give me a hard time. Well, we don't want to do that test. It's carcinogenic. I says, can you spell it? If you can't spell it, do it. Right?
Right.
So
but this is all pre-DNA. That the amazing thing is, it
was all
pre-DNA. What you're doing.
Yes, it was blood type.
Right. So we have to bear that in mind. But
ABO.
Yeah. Right, and it also seemed, Vernon, before people had laid out constructs like staging, that you were already thinking about things like that. I mean, there are cases you've had where you would, I know you would suggest, oh, this looks like a suicide, but this is actually a murder that's been staged to look like one, right? And then you would say that, and they'd look at you like you had two heads, and you'd turn out to be right, right?
Well, yeah,
And
because you have to look at the big picture, Gary. The big picture. They would miss the big picture because they focus myopically on a body that's nude. Okay, it must be a sex crime. No, it doesn't have to be a sex crime. And I remember one case, I came in as a consultant, and it was really upsetting because they were handling this case as a lost murder. And they went to some school, and some guy was talking about lost murders. What actually happened was the girl was killed by her sister and her pimp because she was taking the other sister's business.
Oh,
Okay, this is how base it is. And they went there to kill her, and they were going to bury her, but the ground was too hard. They couldn't bury her. So they stripped the clothes off and put her there nude. So the first response of the local police was, oh, we have a lost murder here. No, you don't. And I'm looking at it, and I'm looking at the forensics. I'm going, this is impossible. They don't see what's going on. That's the only case I testified for the defense on. Okay, I came in and they couldn't believe it. District attorney's office, you're testifying for the defense? I said, yeah, because you got the wrong guy under arrest.
It's the truth.
You arrested some poor schmuck who was a patsy. They set him up to be arrested. The poor guy had epilepsy, and he was just like a patsy, and everybody knew it. That was a great feeling to walk into that courtroom and undo that injustice, and it felt good.
Do you think, with your, I mean, it's a gift, right? You have a gift. Do you sense that gift is connected to your divine devotion, meaning your religious devotion to God, and that He would guide you, through certain situations? I mean, you just don't show up on a scene and immediately have the thought process, right? Like everybody else did. But you had the gift to show up and go, well, wait a minute, this isn't lining up. There's something wrong here. And I've always attributed that to an inspiration.
It is an inspiration. I've given talks about murder, mayhem, and religion. Okay.
Yep.
And how important it is.
That's your next book, Vernon. Murder, mayhem, and religion. That's your next book.
No more books.
I'll read that one tomorrow.
I'll send you the.
I'm going to write that down.
Send you the lecture. Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
But the bottom line is, I don't consider myself smarter or better than anybody. I always surrounded myself with good people, and perfect examples when I was in the South Bronx, and I had some really tough detectives working for me. And this one guy, he was basically, I hate to say it, he was illiterate. He could not read or write. I don't know how he got on the police department, but his value in the street was worth its weight in gold, because he had a way of talking to these characters that they would just surrender just rather than confront them. So what did I do? I hooked him up with a writer. I said, okay, you're going to work with Joe. Joe's a good writer. Okay, so Joe will do the reports and you do this. And that's the way I handled it. And it always worked, you know. And when I ultimately became a commander of Bronx Homicide, I had the frustration of working for a chief who didn't like detectives. He thought we were elitists, and he was an arrogant son of a bitch. He really was. And he put people into my command that I could not trust. Okay, so I had to get rid of them. It took a lot of work to get rid of them because I had to do it institutionally, but I got them. I think you read that, Gary, that chapter, How to Get Rid of Rats.
I did. I read every word of it. But you know, it's interesting, Vernon, because at some point you also wind up getting interested in what I think you've become, certainly in my field, very associated with, which is sexual homicide, right? These autoerotic asphyxiation cases, these cases of serial sexual homicide, so forth. And your work winds up having a very important impact on people who are developing profiling, who are thinking about lust murder in a more sophisticated way, right? We would say serial sexual homicide, right? That would, for these people, these repeat offenders. And I know that there was a lot of controversy surrounding you writing that book that now has become this Bible, right? Even the photographs alone, the trouble you got into. What right did you have?
They wanted to jam me up.
Where did you get? Yeah, well, but it wound up, being important work. And I know, for example, that you would have been working. For example, you had an impact on Hazelwood. Right,
yes,
Roy Hazelwood,
Roy Hazelwood,
who is considered one of the granddaddies of sexual homicide, right? So
and who
maybe
did his
you
own
could talk a little
research.
bit about,
And
maybe you could talk a little bit about how you wound up influencing even FBI, their, Quantico, their ideas, because you were kind of early on doing that work. How did you get into sexual homicide?
Well, it started with the textbook, and there I was. I was so proud that I had written this textbook, the first textbook written by a real cop in 20 years. Okay, a detective sergeant from New York City Police Department wrote the book that hasn't been written for 20 years. I thought I was going to get congratulated. In fact, everybody was congratulated. The FBI was congratulating me, the outside agencies, and it comes in the newspaper. The cop who wrote the book on murder. 24 hours later, I get a call from this eunuch captain. Congratulations, Sergeant, on your book. By the way, you're under investigation.
Oh my goodness.
My stomach dropped. I said, what the hell? I'm under investigation. I says, I can't believe it. They're going to go after, take my job. But she says, by whose authority did you write that book, Sergeant? I said, the First Amendment, right? He goes, you're a wise ass. I said, maybe the Second Amendment. Watch out. What saved my ass was the fact that the FBI thought this was like gold because it was the book that they could use at Quantico. All right. And so they're writing. And at the same time, the police commissioner was a graduate of the same college that I went to. Iona College in New Rochelle. He was proud of the fact. So now I got this insulation. So finally, I find out that this eunuch captain is ordering every photograph of every crime scene I went to in the Bronx. There was like 800.
Wow.
So he's ordering all these pictures, and he's trying to compare the pictures to the pictures in the book. They're not going to be the same because I took my own pictures. He don't know that. So he calls me up. What's the difference between official and unofficial picture, Sergeant? Has read chapter 6, you freaking moron.
So you were ahead of him even while you were writing the book.
Oh, yeah, I knew when I made the request, I knew what I was dealing with.
How did you start getting interested in this construction, this idea of sexual homicide as its own thing that's worthy of looking at, and how that has everyday application for a cop that's out in the world? I mean, Chris, for example, concentrated on child cases that involved some pretty horrific stuff. And sex crimes, things like that. Chris, I mean, Chris is humble, so he won't turn it to himself. But the reality is that he would have been very affected by the kind of thinking that you.
I read everything he wrote.
I mean, so you had a big effect on him, and certainly in the circles we run in people, for example, that were profilers or FBI and so forth, they all know your work. They were all influenced by it. So where did you start to get those ideas from to really start to create this construct of serial, these ideas about serial sexual homicide, what these guys do, why they do it, fantasy, the visual component that you're very interested in,
Yeah.
right? That inspires them. So maybe talk a little bit about that.
Well, before I got to that, the basics with the practical homicide was to have a practical manual to
Yeah,
address
right.
homicide. And don't forget, my first master's degree, I used that to do a clinical study of what we called the quarter kids, the drug deals in Harlem that were done by young black males and females who weren't drug addicts. They were entrepreneurs. And I did a whole sociological study. So when I got the homicide, I decided to use the same idea of the research to research homicide. And it was during the research of homicide, I went to Quantico, I met Hazelwood, Douglas, Ressler, right? And I was able to have good conversation with them from a practical perspective. And that's when I got into the sexual types of homicides. Because while I was in Quantico, a case came down to be profiled, and it came from the Bronx. And I knew the case right away because I've been a Bronx homicide detective. And they were talking about the profile and who it could be. And I'm saying, no. You got to know the neighborhood. This is not a male white, okay? This is a male black, all right? And let me tell you why. And I went through it, and sure enough, right, it all came to pass. So then they bring me down. I became a distinguished lecturer at the FBI Academy on homicide. And to Gary's question about how did I get so into the sex-related, I was doing research to enhance my book. And my studies across the country showed a drastic increase in sex-related homicide. So what started out to be for a new edition became a book of its own.
What year did that kick in, Vernon? What year did you start? Did you actually see that transition taking place?
I'm going to say in the early 2000s.
Interesting.
Yeah, early 2000s, because I was just concentrating on homicide. But when I was, don't forget, people would ask me questions. I'd go to lectures and I'd spend half the time on my break talking to people about their cases.
Yeah.
And then it would send me stuff because they knew if they sent it to me, the material would be safe. I wouldn't be on TV. I wouldn't be talking about their case. I wouldn't claim that I knew about their case, but I helped them. And that reputation enabled me. And Gary knows, Gary, look at the stuff I got from the different places. They sent me everything because they knew I could be trusted. I wouldn't be about myself. Yeah. So I never wrote a Vernon Geberth book. The Godfather book is really basically about how I became a cop and what I did. But I would never take credit for somebody else's cases. Right. So as the cases came in, I began to try to structure this new book, Sex-Related Homicide and Death Investigation, which would include autoerotic, okay, and sexual misadventures, right, into a capsule. And the book, I don't think I could write that book today, Gary. I don't think I could get away with saying what I said.
No, but what's so interesting about it is, that when you really start getting into the history of how these ideas developed into modern profiling and so forth, you see that there were a few people that were working alone, and they all kind of came to the same conclusions, and they wound up melding into these ideas. And I think, you really get a sense that what you started to pick up on really single-handedly in your work was the way that particularly visual fantasy, was magazines, movies, pornography, whatever, and it's like a fuel for them.
Right.
And you give a lot of excellent examples in your book of really out there stuff that these guys had in their possession. Magazines that are altered, where the woman has been cut out and put in.
Okay. You're talking about my early studies. My early studies
Your
from the
early
70s.
Studies, right?
Oh,
it's
yeah,
fascinating stuff.
Yes, because I got access to that.
Right. I remember I asked
there's
you
a lot of
when I was
nuns watching this show right now, so I'm teasing. Don't go too far.
No, we won't get into too much detail. No, but for example, I remember when I was researching the New Evil, I said to you, I remember like it was yesterday, because no one had ever given me an answer to this question before. And I said to you, what do you think people did in the days before print media and the internet? Because there must have been serial sexual sadism before. what did these guys do? And when we talked about it, what you wound up saying to me was they probably were just imagining it or drawing it, or they
Yeah.
would have done it in other ways. And that really made me understand that this is an animal part of these guys, that the visualization, which I think is very related to testosterone, would be my guess, right? Is that it's critical to the understanding, which helps when people are thinking about, for example, the danger of pornography, why it's dangerous in the world, right? And which I'm sure is an opinion you would share, that
That
it's a
yeah,
fuel
it's a
for,
fuel,
right?
but the
So,
problem is
so
you
that's
can't tell
really
people
important
that.
stuff.
You
Yeah.
can't be telling people that you can't look at pornography because they'll go crazy. The thing is that, and I say this, and you know I've said this in my writings, some people cannot be stimulated inappropriately. The average person who looks on might say, "Oh yeah, that's cute," but the person who fixates on it and obsesses with it, that's the danger, because now they start collecting. And what starts out as a fantasy with masturbatory activity certainly develops. I'd like to take us to the next step. Okay. The next step is a live victim. That's the problem. So many of these cases were rehearsed over and over and over again in the pervert's mind, and they have a construct that they now think they can do this. And when they go out and they do it, it doesn't work that way, because you're dealing with another person. You're dealing with dynamics. And a lot of times their efforts turn to, turn bad. And the victim is killed. But that doesn't stop them. That just means they have to go back and practice more. And so I talked about the magazines. They would take the magazines and actually alter the magazines to satisfy their sadistic fantasy. And actually, it looked real. It wasn't. It was glued on very carefully, all right, to satisfy this perverse need. And I took all that. Yeah, you're right. That went into the sexual homicide book, because I was sitting on that material and didn't realize the significance till I talked to other people who were in the business. And that's how you learn. You talk to other people and you compare notes, and it worked.
Vernon, in your
I mean, as
experience,
a,
go
go
ahead,
ahead,
Gary.
Chris.
No, do you go,
No,
Gary.
no, no. Well, I was just going to say that as a clinician, what I found interesting the first time I read that book was that you were picking up on something very important, which was that clinically speaking, a lot of these offenders have paraphilias, they have
Yeah,
paraphilic disorders and fetishes. And you give this incredible list of all the Greek, names for all the for all the paraphilias and fetishes people can have. And so it isn't as simple as, they used to think about it. The person gets aroused by murder. The person gets aroused by torture. What you really did was you painted a picture that people have these totally unique, weird paraphilic or fetish needs that figure into what they're doing. And of course, Hazelwood goes on to prove in his own work that most of the murder was simply because you had to get rid of the witness, or
yeah.
because you went too hard in what you were doing and the person died. So that the killing is not necessarily the paraphilic need that the person has, for a lot of them, the goal is to keep the person alive and play out a fantasy as long as possible. And some of the fetishes that you started to talk about in there, I mean, it was very bold because people didn't want to talk about this stuff.
Right.
But you drew attention to the idea that it was extremely important. And I think that I cannot emphasize enough how important that is, because you started doing is you started saying, yeah, there is a moral, supernatural kind of element to this. But from a clinical perspective, what are these guys? They're psychopaths, they're sadists, they're narcissists, but they have paraphilias and fetishes. And if you don't want to understand that stuff, you're not going to get these murders. So that I
True.
started to get the sense that when you would investigate, you could see things at the crime scene that were going to tell you that a person had a fetish, paraphilia, and then that would help with linkage to other cases, right? And the notion,
Linkage,
for
very
example, of a
important. Yeah,
signature, right?
yeah.
Or a signature, for
Signature or
example,
linkage. Yeah, exactly.
right?
Yeah,
So that
because what happens, and because you're a clinician, what happens is that this is over and over and over again. And if you're trying to replicate a fantasy, it's not going to happen, because the fantasy is a fantasy. You'll never be able to replicate it. The harder you try to replicate it, the more ritualistic you become, and your signature is developed. if that makes sense.
Yep.
So
Of course.
so it's like I say, that second edition. I hope they don't take it off the market. That
No,
book
they'll
can't,
never
that,
take that off the market.
no,
It's
that book
essential.
can't be written again. I'm telling you, Gary, the things I say in that
Yeah.
book and the conclusions I draw, they're real. And that's kind of like, oh yeah, Vernon's like Sherlock Holmes, but he's a Dirty Harry. Okay, he's got two personalities.
Well, I mean, there are so many cases where this comes in, and then I want to let Chris ask what he was about to ask. But like, for example, as a consequence of understanding these people from the inside out, you were able in a prescient way to foresee things before other people did, right? So, like, simple example, if anybody who Googled you would see the footage of you many, many years ago talking about Gilgo Beach, right?
Yeah.
And saying at the time, this is going to be a serial killer. There's going to be more of these. This is what's going to, because you understood right away that there were commonalities that indicated somebody with some kind of paraphilic need and signature needs was probably doing all of these things in a collected way, rather than there being a whole slew of people. And then, of course, it turned out years later, they wind up connecting these people, these victims, to one offender who's now charged, right? So, I guess what I'm trying to do is help the audience see that it's very easy to take for granted that at the time you were doing this, these were novel ideas. Now we all think like this, but at the time you were doing it, you would have gotten knocked for thinking that way.
But on the day the body was discovered, I was on Fox News, and I said, if they don't want to call him a serial killer, I'll call him a serial killer. He's got a dumping ground. And I started listing the people who had dumping grounds. They were mad as hell at me, the authorities. Right? Who was he talking about? What's he talking about? I say, listen, don't kill the messenger. All right. I'm just telling you. And it turned out everything I said was true. But I don't want credit for that. I just want to prove that, listen, don't be so close-minded. They didn't like that word serial murder. They didn't like that word. So
well,
you are the
Elon.
You're the Elon Musk of homicide, Vernon.
I wish I had his money.
you were on Mars before anybody had even thought how we're going to get there. And that's kind of a lonely place too, because that really is a gift from God, because I mean, you're way over here, and the other folks are here going, what's he talking about? Yet if you were wise enough to listen to you, which I will put my hand up and say I'm in that category.
A lot of people listen to me.
But you were so far ahead of it, which leads me to my next question here is, in true crime today, I mean, it's a huge, huge interest. It's always been. I mean, I think folks forget that, back in the 30s and the 40s, I mean, they were taking the Al Capone days and the mob days during your time in the 70s and everything. I mean, it's always been a big thing, but the internet has changed it so much now, where, the interest of the public, they're becoming their own detectives, and they're disagreeing sometimes.
Yeah, you're right. I've seen that. I avoid. Gary invited me to come on your podcast. I don't do this. I've turned down many true crime things because I didn't want to be in a position of people thinking I was bragging or telling stories.
Sure.
This is different. This is about the Godfather of Homicide, how I got to be who I was, and the reason I did that was for my kids, my grandkids. My kids know who I am. My grandkids, they were little. Now they're all young adults. But it'd be nice to know that leave something behind, that this is how I got to be who I was. Because, yes, if you Google me, I got all these accolades and it looked like some sort of like super cop or something. No, I'm the same guy I was from 30 years ago. I never let higher education affect my morals or my direction. All right. I knew what I had to do. And that's what I did. I said, we're working for God. That's it. All right. And so I was blessed by the associations that I made across the country. And of course, meeting Gary, and now I'm meeting you. These are additional things for me to bring to my, to expand my horizon, so to speak. And knowing that I had that stuff, I had a responsibility to make sure it was shared. And that's why in the Sex-Related Homicide book, Gary, we have a whole chapter on BTK. I had the entire case. It was given to me. Okay, when everybody else was claiming credit, how they solved it and everything, no. They solved the case. What I did is I wrote it up. I gave it back to the supervisory special agent, Larry Thomas, and Ken Landwehr, who was the lieutenant. I says, read this and tell me if it's correct. They said, absolutely. This is good. It's gospel. It's going into the textbooks of a chapter. And that's what makes the book valuable.
Yeah, that most definitely. I mean, there, and that's why I will tell any investigator that's just kicking off their career, you must have this book in your library, because it's basically, you know, the Bible. You can go to it and say, okay, I may have this situation, but what does it really mean? You know, I mean, and we could get into that stuff all day long, but it's here. It's in this book, right next to me. But and then your life story. One of the things that I think I've struggled with over my time is I can't stand phonies.
Oh, welcome to the club.
And I don't know if
that's why I have enemies. Gary tried to put something online
I'm
for me to enhance my reputation. There's somebody sniping at me in the backfield.
And you know, you see all these people out there, you know, and it's okay for them, you know, but if they've never done the job and they're out there and they're just, you know, projecting that, hey, I'm ABC and this is what you're looking at, et cetera, but they've never done the job. You know, they were, you know, maybe in the warrant squad or something. Okay, great, fine. Yeah, you've chased those guys, but you've never stood over that dead child at 2:00 in the morning.
Yeah.
You know, and do the math. How do you handle that? I need your advice, because it drives me nuts.
I don't have the solution. All I know is I married a good woman who listens to me, and I someplace where I can talk about it. You know, the hours that I put in were hours that were taken from my family.
Yeah.
And that's the sad part about it. But those hours were very valuable in creating the textbooks, the manuals, and the things that I used to teach other people. I had a wife that supported me. Suppose I had a woman that's, I don't want to, you know, I want to go here, I want to do this, I want to do that, you know, and it's a whole different dynamic. And she's been with me my entire life. You know, my wife literally typed that textbook 10 times. You know the expression cut and paste?
Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you what cut and paste is. We cut the 8.5 by 11 and put it together with Scotch tape, and wife would retype the page. All right, that's cut and paste.
Yeah.
No, this is before
That's
computers.
Funny.
Yeah.
I love it.
It's like the old joke that it's like the old joke that there wouldn't have been any America if it weren't for Christopher Columbus, but there wouldn't have been any Christopher Columbus if it weren't for his mother. Well, you know, you got to thank the women, you know, that do these things, right? But I mean, certainly, I guess there would have been an America, but it wouldn't have been discovered, is what I should have said. But I think that there are so many things that you contribute that it's easy to miss. For example, I work up at Boston College with Ann Burgess, whose work I know you know very well and respect. Of course, you've helped in getting our own work out there. In fact, through your series, your CRC series, right? I think her book on what's always been interesting to me is that you're sort of an unsung hero. I think part of what happens with people who make important contributions is that part of the blessing of being good at something is that you don't get credit, really, right? It comes with the territory of that you're kind of invisible, or people are knocking you, or they can only relate to you through a kind of envy, right? It comes with the package, I think. And so that is also, I think, added to you as an interesting character, and it added to some honor, you know, at the idea that you were willing to kind of support my own work, because I had the feeling of it takes one to know one. You know, you must have seen some promise in it, or you wouldn't have. So I really appreciate that.
Now, I spent a lot of time with it because I thought it was valuable. I thought what you did was valuable. All right.
And you gave me a warning. You gave me a warning, which turned out to be true. And the warning you gave me was, it's only a matter of time until this book turns up in the hands of an offender.
Correct. That's my biggest fear.
Yeah. Has that happened to you?
Yes, it has. My book was found at the crime scene. Devastating. And And also in the collections of some of these serial killers, my book was in the library, their library, not the public library. Don't forget, these people do research too. You know, a lot of serial murderers are students of serial murder. If the fantasy is that strong that they want to do that, then they want to, I guess they want a precedent, all right? And so they look at how these other people operate, and they think they're going to be smarter, because it's always like, I'm smarter than everybody else. Because don't forget that ego, that malignant narcissism that makes people think they're better than other people, and I know better. All right, so they're students of this. So if there's material out there that can help them do what they want to do, they're going to access it. And I put stuff on my website for cops and investigators. Or if I find that something's interesting, I'll put it up there on the research material. Be my guest, use it. And and this has nothing to do with sex related, but suicide, which is prevalent across the country. I wrote a simple article, the 7 major mistakes in suicide investigation. To you, that thing has been downloaded thousands of times. And I get calls from families that said, Mr. Geberth, could you please look at that case? I'm sorry, I don't have the resources to do that. But take that to your local district attorney or your local and show them the mistake, because it's quite obvious. So you don't know what kind of value you're doing when you're writing. And you're hoping that what you put together will help somebody. Okay, I know that's off the topic. I'm sorry, but it just came into my head.
That's exactly the point.
Popped in when I wasn't looking.
That's exactly the point. And the other thing that I think made for a click when Michael and I reached out to you was, I noticed that this hypothesis that Michael and I had, that there is this phenomenon of new evil, that we're in some kind of period of disinhibition where the average person who is committing crime is doing things that are just a little worse, right? That the crimes are getting more common, more horrible, and involving new technologies that are really changing the face of crime, right? I found that when we talk to younger people, younger investigators, younger clinicians, they poo-pooed it. They claimed that the crime has been happening the same way since day one, since Cain and Abel. And it's not true. When we talk to people who have been around longer, who remember the period before the 1960s, they said, you are 100% right. Crime is changing, and it must be cultural. And in fact, I learned from Ann Burgess that one of the reasons that they started to study serial killing at Quantico behavioral science, whatever, was that they were noticing a change, an explosion of sexual crime since the late 1960s, and they needed to understand why it was happening. And so she gets involved because she's got the background in sexual assault. Mm-hmm. And she's been talking to victims, and she can help them understand from the victim perspective, people who survived assault, the weird, horrible paraphilic things that people were making them say and do at the level of the offense that were part of the fantasy. And so it really brought it to life. So I guess one of the things I was hoping you could talk about is, do you see that cultural change? And what the heck is going on, in the past, let's say 50, 60 years, especially in the Western world? What do you think is going on?
Well, you articulated it pretty well. It's a combination of things. It's a combination of the lowering of inhibitions. It's a combination of the availability of the materials that weren't there. I mean, I'll go back into my youth when I was a child, a teenager, right? Girly magazines. Well, the special parts were airbrushed out, right? So you didn't see nothing. Okay. Now forget about it. They bombard you with. So the inadequate personality is being bombarded by these sexual imagery and messages. It's definitely going to have an effect, and they're going to act out upon it. And so that the internet, like you mentioned, of course, the availability of the materials and the lowering of expectations of behavior. All right. Yeah. Used to be, we used to have neighborhoods. People would watch out for the kids of their neighbors, and that's out the window. Nobody knows anybody anymore. Right. So when you don't have these controls, people need controls. We need to have parameters, right, to keep us online, because given to our own devices, we'll screw up. We can't help it with people. All right. So you hit them with the wrong material, you're going to get a screw up. So it's much bigger than you, I, or Chris. This is a phenomenon.
Yeah. It's interesting. I talked to a youth group at church recently, and I I held this up. That's my dog, my puppy. And I asked him, I said, how many windows are in this building, in the building? And all the kids looked around and, pointed all the windows out. And I said, yeah. I said, do you realize for the first time in human history that the devil can come in during the sacrament meeting and sit right next to you?
Excuse me. Oh, I thought I was going to sneeze.
For the very first time, that depends on what window we open, can take us either to heaven or to hell. It's up to us to choose.
It's a good analogy. It's a good analogy.
And these kids are like, they don't even think about it anymore. It's right.
No, they're numb to it. They're numb. I'm just thinking of my own grandkids. Okay, some of the stuff that they see on their phones, and Grandpa, I'm saying, well, listen, Grandpa doesn't think you should be looking at that crap. All right. Oh yeah, but it's a good movie. I says, yeah, I don't know if it's a good movie. I'm trying to think of the name of the movie. I Spit on Your Grave. That's the one. Have you ever seen that? When I Spit on Your Grave,
one of the worst. Yeah. One of the most vile. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm saying.
I know it well.
So I actually used clips of that in my training. Okay, to make a point of what I was trying to, discuss with the class. Okay, my granddaughter's looking at it. I said, "What are you doing?" So, yeah.
Well, but didn't you ever notice, Vernon, that the sexual preoccupations and the fears of a given period in history, at least modern history, are reflected in the movies and the things, in the movies, for example, sci-fi movies and horror movies from the 50s were all about creatures affected by atomic energy that were going to destroy people, giant ants and mantises and whatever.
I love that movie. The movie Them
with the ants. Yeah, right, exactly. By the time you get to the 70s and 80s, they're slasher films basically about serial killers that go into a dorm, like a sorority house, and are repetitively killing the pretty, women, the pretty women that live there that are half naked all the time. And the audience is enjoying it. The interesting thing is that instead of being frightened and horrified, the audience is almost rooting for the killer. And then the people who make the movies have to make the murders more and more intricate. In fact, one of the things you'll notice they do in those movies is they make the characters as odious as possible so that when they get killed, you're almost happy.
They make the character How many issues nasty. Of Friday the 13th are there? How many?
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, well,
that's right. And there is a merging of sexual violence and sexual excitement, violence and sexual excitement. So that, for example, the other day I was talking to a young woman who said to me that she was upset about her body count. And body count is the term that is used for how many people you've had intercourse with. Young people use that term now, right? And they want to have a higher one, or they feel disappointed in themselves. And that's true of men and women. So let me be clear on that. But the term body count used to refer to the number of people you killed.
It's new for me. But I did see something. Right. I did see something about a girl. She wanted to sleep with a certain amount of men in one day in 24 hours. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes, well, I've seen that too. But but the idea is that it's considered, the idea of body count is very interesting because it sounds like this strange mixture of sexual violence as opposed to love making or doing that with somebody. I mean, you're talking about being in a relationship with somebody for 60 years. Nowadays, you're lucky if the relationship is 60 minutes.
63. Correct the record. 63. We went out with boyfriend for 3 years before.
Right. But I think it has to do, again, it has to do with the idea that there's been a divorcing of the idea that inhibition is part of loving somebody. That if you're in a relationship that you put your own needs aside and your animal instincts, you say, I'm going to do what's best for you. That notion is kind of out the window in relationships now. So it's like, if it doesn't feel good, I'm out. And that can take a month.
I'm thinking if I mentioned earlier, I said my wife should be up for beatification. That's that step before sainthood, because 60 years of dealing with Vernon, I'm really, sometimes she tells me, you know something, you're like a robot. Because I get up early, I go to the gym. If I don't go to the gym by 6:30, I'm not going to go. I want to get it over with. But it,
Discipline.
it's discipline. It's self-discipline. But it's funny because even in the police department, when most of my career I was in investigations, I was in plainclothesman, but I wrote the textbook, so I had to be punished. So they put me back to uniform, right, as a uniform lieutenant. So I'm a desk officer. I'm a desk officer in the worst frickin' precinct in the South Bronx. They call the place the Alamo. It's so frickin' bad, right? And I'm in the Alamo, and I'm looking at these cops turning out, and I'm saying, this ain't going to work. So I watch it for a couple of days. Then I decide, okay, I'm going to put my awards on. I'm going to go in the back room. We're going to turn out the platoon. I said, from now on, you're going to be turned out like Marines, okay? If you don't respect the way you look, you're not going to be in the street. You're not going to get respect. Next thing you know, each group was coming in because they would change and they'd all watch to see what happened, who would get yelled at. Right? So now I had them all marching, open ranks march, the whole routine. Then go out the street. And Sunday, in the NYPD, they used to call Sunday Cops Day because Sunday they figure you can get away with, you don't have to do nothing, right? So I'd give a speech. All right. I understand that you heard today's Cops Day. Sunday is Cops Day. No, you're working for God. It's God's day, okay? And you're going to be out there. And so what happens is, unbeknownst to me, the high command from the borough, right, has been hearing about how sloppy the cops are turning out and this and that. So this inspector comes in, inspector of police, to watch the turnout of the platoon. And he sees me behind the desk and he shakes his head. He goes, what are you doing behind the desk, Vernon? You're the top homicide. I said, I'm learning humility. But they told me I have to learn humility. So he goes, well, I have bad news for you. I'm here to inspect the outgoing platoon. I says, okay, let's go inspect it. We go in the back room, right? And open ranks, march. He goes, holy shit. What happened? I said, I turned him into TPF cops inspector. He goes, I can't wait to go back to tell the borough chief what you did. But that's the way I am. Be proud of what you do.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Oh, yeah. I mean, no, you've just triggered all kinds of memories in my head when, both of my parents were Marines.
Oh, okay. God bless them.
Yes, sir. And then my TAC officer in the academy was an infantry Marine in Vietnam. His name is Frank Bruckner. God bless you, Frank, if you're listening. And he walks up to me, to your story, during an inspection. He looks down at my shoes and he goes, McDonough, did you shine those with a Hershey bar this morning? And I see you as that kind of guy. And I'm going, I just look at him, sir, no, sir. He goes, you're just.
It was very effective.
Yeah, it was very effective. I still have.
But you're picking up on something important. I think gets right to the heart of this new evil idea, which is that you believed in something higher than yourself. There was a philosophy that drove you, and I think that's very much at the heart of what's going wrong. I think that there's an emptiness in modern culture because we got rid of a lot of the philosophies and ideas that glued us together. If you don't have a sense of purpose, you're going to go out and fill it with fantasy and stimulation and things like that you're going to mistake for a meaning of life. And if you lose that thing, you'll kill yourself, or you'll go out and commit aggression because there's nothing left. There's no reason to be alive. It's trouble. And I think that that's exactly what it is. From the time that you were a kid, you were always serving. You always had something that was larger than yourself. And I think I have found that's the secret. For example, when I'm dealing with youth that are starting to go down a bad path, I give them something to do, something to serve, something larger than themselves. And they start to believe in themselves. And it makes a big difference. It really does.
I'm here locally. I'm in the police foundation. Okay. We support the police officers and their families. And we have these fundraisers. And we need help. And we get help from the kids at the Marco Island Academy. And they're doing service. They're learning about service. They're coming down and they're doing something to help and give them a higher purpose in life. And you should see the difference in the behavior in those kids at the Marco Island Academy versus the local high school. Okay? Because they have these community assignments, so to speak. So I think it's important. I really do.
Definitely. And I'm sure you've taught that to everybody in your family, all the kids and grandkids. Now, Chris, there were a couple of cases in the book
Well,
that
it's a good
I
segue
wanted to ask
into,
Vernon about.
yeah, but hang on real fast, because there's a good segue what Vernon just said into,
Oh, sure.
let's talk a little bit about what the inspiration was. I know this is about your life, and you're the Godfather of Homicide. I absolutely love that, by the way.
I didn't call myself that.
Mr. Murder.
No,
The news media called me that.
Well,
They call you
yeah.
Mr. Murder too, didn't they?
And
Yeah.
look at this salad bar you got going here. Look at this. All these awards and everything. I mean,
That's the Dirty Harry part. That's the Dirty Harry part.
Did you ever make it out to San Francisco at any time? Did you ever go into their office up there, that old dump they had?
No, but I had San Francisco officers in my class because they used to do 2 homicide investigation seminars a year in Las Vegas,
Right.
a 3-day and a 5-day. And everybody from California would come over because I wasn't allowed to teach in California because you had to be an officer from California for CHIA.
Yeah.
All right. But they came over to see me in Las Vegas.
I never saw you.
Yeah, probably.
Seriously.
But I had one guy show up. He was from the what do you call it, Post, and he was in Las Vegas. I said, "What are you doing here? You're from California. You're from Post." He said, "I want to see what you have so I can steal it." I said, "Well, you can attempt to steal it, but you couldn't possibly present it like me because you don't curse enough."
Yeah.
I just put the New York thing on it. How come? What is all these F-bombs? I said, "Well, in New York City, the guy with the most F-bombs wins the conversation." Right?
Which, by the way, you've done a great job, and I'm grateful for it. And I know our audience will be. They absolutely love it. But so really, I mean, bottom line here, I know this is your life story, but what did mom, your sweetheart, did she kind of move you to? And I know you are saying this is for your grandkids, but it's more than just for your grandkids, because I'm glued to this thing. And, every time I turn the page, it's, a CI incident or, which is a confidential informant for our audience here. And it works right from your, when you were a kid, the newspapers, the lifeguard, the UPS, and you're moving your life story. And next thing you know it, you're solving some of the country's most horrific homicides. And not only that, you're a legend in the homicide world, and rightfully so. Even guys like me going, "Holy cow, I'm talking to Vernon."
No, it's no big deal. But how about those jackass bosses that get in the way of progress? You're going to find them throughout the book, all right? Because I don't want to identify by name because I don't want to get sued, but they know who they are.
I think that's jealousy. I have a theory on that. Can I share my theory?
Sure, I'd love to hear it.
Right. I mean, in the military, they separate you, right, to officer candidate school, OCS. Okay. Mm-hmm. But law enforcement is the only career where you're in the academy running side by side with that guy who could be your boss one day. And, that structure up until the street, and all of a sudden the street decides, hey, you know what? I'm going to go the admin route. Okay. I mean, sergeants are like captains in the Marine Corps, right? I mean, everybody loves a captain because he gets it done. And that's what sergeants are. But then you start hitting the higher ups, and eventually, you get into the White Castle up there. And in the academy, we're trained 1,000% to look for problems to keep us alive.
Correct.
Right? Look for problems, keep us alive. Well, what decides, when does that transition take place? When you leave the street, what becomes the street? The department. And I have a philosophy that, those that can't make it on the street make it way up here, and that their street becomes the guys below them. And that means jealousy. I mean, I can only imagine, what I'm going to hit here, because it's coming up. I am getting set up for it. I can feel it coming. And the jealousy that takes place, the envy that takes place, instead of, like some of the, I was blessed to be, like I said, around Marines my whole life. That's how I ended up in California. My dad retired at Camp Pendleton.
Right.
And I saw that structure of how it didn't matter if you were an 06 colonel or if you're a Lance Corporal bag of donuts down at the bottom. It was, good job, son. We're all coming home together.
Correct. That's the way it should be.
Right. And that's, I guess, and that's where I'm going. How does it get lost? And what advice would you give to young investigators going into the game today?
Be true to yourself. All right. Be true to yourself. Remember why you joined this operation, to do good. Okay. And it's rules and procedures. They're all nice, but a lot of those rules and procedures, right? Many of them weren't thought out. Okay. It looks good in theory. Okay. When you bring it into the street, it's not going to work. Being able to take the two, the street and the procedures, the institutional protocols, and at the same time get the job done. But what I would suggest is make sure you document, because that'll save your ass. Because I came into the police department at a time when corruption was systemic. Being a tactical patrol force cop, I was never exposed to it. I saw stuff. I just kept notes. Made sure I didn't do that. Later on, when they came in with NAP Commission and anti-corruption, all the biggest thieves became the biggest preachers. You talk about phonies, right? The biggest thieves became the biggest preachers, right? So if me or my troops got in trouble, I turned and said, hold on, Captain, where were you in 72? Okay, I got notes. You're a wise guy, Geberth. I said, yeah, but I kept notes. So don't screw with my people, all right, when I know you do. And that's how I survived.
The hypocrisy of it, right? Better, the hypocrisy of it. And so that dovetails into what's the most common mistake you would teach your guys to avoid?
Oh, that's a big question. Oh,
sorry, it's loaded, sir.
That's a loaded question. I tell you what the biggest mistake is. All right, booze and women. All right, don't get involved with these loose gals, and don't become a drunk. Don't think you can drink your way through the problems. You got to be able to talk it out to different people, peer level stuff. I've seen a lot of good people go down because they didn't get the proper counseling they needed. And I'm not smarter or better than anybody else. I had a good woman in my life that stabilized me. Maybe you don't have that, right? So everybody's different. But I respected what I had, and I was true to myself. And throughout my career, and anybody who worked for me or with me will say he never changed. In fact, the biggest compliment I ever got was when someone was complaining when I was telling them what they had to do. They all said, Geberth never told anybody what to do that he didn't do himself. And that's important because they knew I was the first guy through the door. But,
You see what you just said, Vernon, that's extremely important, is that another seed to this period of new evil is the loss of family structure and those stable figures in your life that glue you together. And if you go in and you talk to offenders that commit sexual assault repetitively or with or without murder, one of the things that I'm writing about it for a new book is we put the emphasis on sex all the time, that this stuff comes in puberty and whatever. But what I've learned from reviewing cases or being involved is that a lot of them have control obsessions because the people in their lives were not stable. They had a family member that was an alcoholic. Somebody was beating them up. Somebody abandoned them. Somebody was, screaming at them all the time. So that it winds up transferring in puberty to the people that you're assaulting sexually, right? But that from the earliest days, those fantasies are really about, I don't have a stable person in my life. Now I'm going to control somebody by stalking somebody, know everything about them, make them into a fantasy figure, tie them up, them, make them respect me, whatever. So that I think is very much about looking for that stable figure. And I think what you're really saying is it isn't only that the people are getting disinhibited or whatever, but that basic structure of family and having somebody that loves you in a stable way seems to be very tied to the question of how do we prevent making more of the people that go out and commit these horrible offenses. They seem to come from those kind of lives. Has that been your experience too?
Yes, and in my case, I believe in religion. I believe in going to church. I think you need to respect the higher authority. You can't think that you can do whatever you want. And going to church, and some people, I don't have to go to church. I don't have to go to a building to pray to God. I can pray to God anytime. Well, maybe that works for you, but I think you need the structure of going to church, receiving the sacraments, getting what we need internally so that we can be strong. And again, well, I'm not preaching to the world.
You know, you're speaking truth. I mean, there has to be even the smaller agencies. You know, we're in Cali, where you see these guys when they retire. It's sad. I mean, I look back at my colleagues who have retired, and they meet every Tuesday, and all they do is complain. That's all they do all day long. You know, and for the, you know, hey, it's good to see you, and let the session begin. I don't go to them, you know, because to your point, there has to be something other than yourself that you gotta look past it. And then how many of us know cops that have, you know, sitting in the lounge chair with a beer in a hand and a gun in the other?
True. You know? Study, but I do know in my own life, when I retired, if I didn't do what I did for the last 30 years, teach and preach and research and write, I don't know, would I be the same person? I had a goal. You have to have goals. Yeah. You have this podcast. I've never been on a podcast. This is my first time.
It's the number one podcast, Vernon, number one.
Well, you're a pro. You handled it like a pro.
No, but I had to get these things out of my head, which is good because I have no hair anymore. So this.
But you were born to do it. You were born to do it. You're a natural.
This is important. That's a goal. That what you do. There's a lot of work involved in this because I know you have a console over there and you're pushing buttons and our screens are popping up. So obviously you have an expertise, which is good. That's going to keep you young. And I don't know what I'm going to do, but here I'm on the podcast, Salt.
I love it.
Case, but you worked on so many. I mean, another example is you were consulted on Henry Wallace. It's a case very dear to Ann Burgess, right? Mm-hmm. Who you know, was part of that case. That was the Taco Bell strangler, right? Down in the Carolinas. You were involved in you were consulted on Cottingham, right? Yes. Richard Cottingham. That's the Times Square killer. You were on John Robinson, if I remember correctly, and Russell Williams. Yeah, Russell Williams also. I just wrote about him for that book with Ann.
Okay.
And so, you know, talk about a guy that went down a bad path.
I would say that with all those cases you just mentioned, I hope I never get a head injury, Gary. I don't want them devils coming out.
Oh my God.
Well, you know, that's an interesting point about the role of head injury in some of these people, you know, disinhibition and all that. But see, what I thought was interesting about the Williams case is that, you know, with a lot of these guys, it really seems that if they had a good upbringing and someone who cared about them and a little structure, some of those traits might have been used in a pro-social way. They might have been fearless people that could throw themselves on a grenade or do things because they weren't afraid, right? It's that they applied it anti-socially because they had terrible things happen to them in a lot of their lives, or people rejected them or abused them, whatever. So I have the sense that the biology part can be used the right way in some people, because if they have a little bit of help when they're young. And Russell Williams, I think, is a good example of somebody that was towing the line. In one way, he was doing a lot of pro-social things with his military background, and remember, he was flying the Queen.
Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry,
and all that stuff. But then he twists in the other direction, and
he's a perfect example of compartmentalization.
Exactly,
ultimate example of compartmentalization.
So what
you're talking about the serial sexual
sadist? Was he killing prostitutes?
No, actually, his neighbors.
Interesting.
He was there. Was doing, you know, there was a couple of things that were dropped, and I hate to criticize law enforcement, but sometimes you have to. You got to be honest.
Yeah.
If I had 2 home invasions like that within 2 weeks, where girls were made to perform, I would have linked those cases right away.
Yeah.
The problem was the first investigator. I don't want to get into his head, but he kind of poo-pooed the idea that this would happen. And he didn't like when the girl said, he told me to roll over on my tummy. He thought that was kind of like silly. Well, that's exactly what he said. Roll over on your tummy. So things like that, and you miss it because home invasions are a big deal.
Yeah.
Sexual assault and home invasion. You have two within the same community. That's a problem.
Yeah, you got a problem.
But again,
and that verbiage becomes huge.
Yes.
The word tummy.
Yeah. There's that dog.
Well,
I hear that dog.
In a lot of
that's
cases,
my little Jack Russell. He's a fan of the show, by the way. Yeah, he'll get more views than all of us combined, Vernon. Yeah, the dog will. Hey, did you work? Just out of curiosity, did anybody ever call you on? Remember Ronald Porter, 85 to 90? We had in San Diego County, we had 43 approximately body dumps, most of them prostitutes.
No, I'm not familiar with that case at all.
I wish they would have called you back in the day. That's right when I got into the Bureau in 1990 is when that thing was kind of rounding up. And they had, I wrote an officer's report. I was a vice guy from 1984 to 86. And anyway, I wrote an officer's report from one of our gals. Her name was Freddie. That was her street name, Frederica Goldstein. That's
a hell of a name.
I still have her in me. And anyway, long story short, she got choked and thrown out of a very small MG. And years later, they pulled that. We used to call it a 153. It was an officer's report. And I get a phone call from the task force up there, and they said, "Hey, you wrote a 153 on this situation. You got any more information on it?" And anyway, it ended up being Porter, who they ended up connecting him to your linkage concept. Right. They linked him to, I think, 3 or 4, and he went down for 3 or 4, but they suspected him of 43.
Yeah.
So,
well, Chris, one of the cases that you worked on that I know that Vernon will know intimately was Chris. Chris was involved in the Wesley Allen Dodd.
Oh, horrible case.
Yeah.
Now,
horrible
Dodd,
case.
I think Dodd is in many ways the epitome of serial sexual homicide. And somebody that you can understand somebody applying the term evil, right? Clinically, we would say that he had paraphilic disorder, he was a sexual sadist, so forth, personality disorder, etc. But there is no question of the moral abomination of what that guy did.
Oh, it's horrible. And, that whole case, especially the little boy. You're not going to kill me, right?
Right.
Michael. That's my weak point. Kid cases. I'm sorry. I know during my career I avoided them if I could.
Chris was a pro at them. Yeah, you were a pro, Chris. They made good use of your skills.
I got thrust into it like the next guy. I mean, in terms of my boss came to me, and at the time, we had like 6 or 7 kids in San Diego County that were, showing up dead, right? We had, Leticia Hernandez, December 16th, 1989. She was abducted out of her front yard. And then we had like the Sellers boys and, Van Dam. I don't know if these kids' names ring a bell with you. Anyway, my boss came to me and he goes, "Hey, guess where you're going?" And I'm like, "Where?" He goes, "Well, you're good at talking with people. So we're going to send you to," it was a modified course on, that the BAU, remember they used to send you back to Quantico to learn from you, but then they started this train the trainers and it was regional. And so I got stuck with an FBI guy on a regional basis. And then I took a class with Mary Ellen O'Toole, but she was teaching like satanic ritual stuff that, nobody was killing, sacrificing kids or anything like that, at least out there in I call it the land of nuts and fruits, but and so I got, stuck into, learning about, sexual sadistic homicide for sexual gratification during murder. And, one of those things. And it was like, next thing you know, my phone's ringing off the hook, "Hey, would you talk to us about this? Would you talk about that? And so I really dove into your stuff, Vernon, and in full disclosure here, I dove into your stuff. I dove into Ann's stuff. I still have right behind me. Let me get it. I'll be right back. My internet went out, but this one.
Oh,
this was the 91.
Yep.
So I still have this from the school, and you're all over this thing. And
I hope I didn't perpetrate anything.
No, Hazelwood's all over this thing, but
I respected Roy Hazelwood because he was an honest researcher, and he told some of these characters they believed in their own print. That's the problem. I just tell it like it is. I have no filter when it comes to, and you talk about phonies and bullshit. I have no problem. I have a bullshit meter. I have no problem telling like it is. And Gary's tried to help me out. Gary tried to give me a presence online. It took him like a week, and they kept rejecting everything he would put up.
I mean, you're the real deal. I mean, and just
that's what it is.
I don't think people understand. I mean, and just. Here's a thing, red flags and what is it? Range of sexual behaviors in children. Okay. I mean, these are things that, are in here. Okay. And when I started my career, I was told, look, one, you're going to get this. Okay. Now this is the 5th edition, but I've had the other editions.
Yeah.
Two, I got this at the school, so they handed me this. Right. And then it was shut up, you don't know anything, and learn. And I really, going back to Jigsaw John's, when I asked him and he said, "Are you teachable?" I said, "Yeah." Eventually I got to that point. And he said, okay, he said, don't investigate people, investigate information. I said, okay, that's good. Up here. And he says, after everything is buttoned up, i.e. the body's gone, all the evidence is collected, and it's you in that crime scene. He says, take some time and sit in that crime scene or stand in whatever, he told me if you use a chair. And then he said, watch that wall. Then turn, watch that wall, watch that wall, watch that wall. He said, do 360, kid. He said, you'll be amazed at what those walls will tell you.
Yeah, he's talking about absorbing the scene. Because when you absorb the scene, you're able to articulate it much better, and you're able to explain it, especially when you're in court, to be able to visualize and explain to the people what you saw.
Now, see, that's the first time I've ever heard the actual definition of that. And see, right there,
he was good at what he did.
He was.
He was good at what he did. He's a legend.
Well, you're a legend. You guys ran in the same club. I can say that because, I've watched you over the years in terms of read and learned, and so, yeah. I mean, you guys are in a different league. There's no question about it.
Well, we're all together on this podcast, so we're all equal.
Well, I appreciate that.
And if it wasn't for Gary, I wouldn't be here.
Well, and you know what? And again, that goes back to the circle, right? With Robert De Niro, you're the circle of trust.
Yeah, right. No, but you know what it is, Chris, is that I'm very drawn to people that make contributions but are unsung, because I think that the best people in a business, that's what happens to them. And so I'm a very big fan of forcing people's attention to where it should be. I mean, the reality is, Chris, you and I know, working on, we do a lot of this media stuff and whatever, you know how everybody with an armchair thinks that he's an expert, or knocks what you say or whatever. And of course they call you a fool. And then when you're proved right, nobody ever comes back and says, all right, you were right.
That's how it works.
Months ago, years ago, they never do. Right. And they criticize you, you say to them, what are your credentials? Salting the French fries, like what credential do you have that you're attacking? And so I think what happens is when you're dealing with somebody like Vernon, is that he has an unimpeachable background.
Right.
I mean, it's like it's almost silly to argue,
Right.
against it. And I think people like that deserve respect. And I mean, there are a lot of podcasts, true crime podcasts, that have never had an expert guest.
Yeah.
It's just people sitting around talking about cases, which I think sometimes is damaging to the case because they're flooding the community with an interpretation that's totally warped. It can have an effect on juries, the jury pool. There are cases that I think have been moved out of a jurisdiction because people have been so impacted by a false narrative
And I think
that's
that's
been
why
put
it's
out there. What's that?
That's why I think it's important to have, the voices like Vernon who have,
Right.
who have that experience of, just years and decades and decades of experience. And then you just start stacking numbers on top of that and you go, okay, but I know he's humble enough to know, that he projects himself as, look, I'm no BS, which is all top homicide guys. I mean, from my experience of hanging around, the neighborhood for a little bit, all these guys, it's never about them, right? It never is. And to hear, or like just 30 seconds ago, right? Absorbing the crime scene, now I only spent a short period of my career in the Bureau. I mean, very small piece of my career, 13 years in homicide. Okay. That's nothing. That's in the big picture, that's absolutely nothing. Okay. What drives me crazy is, today's world where, they start these podcasts and it's like stolen valor. They're phonies. And, next thing you know it, they're talking as if, they've stood in Vernon's shoes and, they project this, talking head concept on TV and all this other stuff. And to your point, Gary, yeah, they can screw up a lot of cases pretty fast in today's world because this is a very powerful platform. Right. And it can really make a difference if you use it correctly. And that's what.
Well, there's also the danger of people who don't know how to hold back information. That's another problem.
That's a good point.
In order to distinguish, a false confession from a true confession, whatever, you got to hold some stuff back. And what happens is you got this kind of world of leaking where information gets out into the community. I mean, Vernon, you know what I'm talking about. You've got to hold some stuff back.
Yeah, absolutely.
It gets out there. It's dangerous.
There's cases in my not the Godfather book. The Godfather book is basically Vernon Geberth, but the Practical Homicide book, I identify cases like that where we had information and some jackass goes and gives it to the newspapers. That was a key piece of information that only the killer and the cops knew, and that's the way it should have been kept.
Yeah, amen.
Well, a classic example of that is in the Richard Ramirez case. You remember the Night Stalker case. The police discovered that he wore a very particular type of sneaker because they found the print on a bucket outside a window that he had climbed on to get through the window to go in and kill a victim. And they were going to be able to figure out possibly even where he bought the shoe. I mean, they got the print. They figured out this very obscure sneaker that I think it was and at the time, Dianne Feinstein was the mayor of the city there, and she went out and told the public,
"That's the problem.
Good news, we found this sneaker." And Ramirez took the shoes and threw them over the side of a bridge.
Well,
never wore them again.
Remember in Dodd, where the sheriff went on TV and was telling the world that, yeah, we're searching over here. And he had the kid in the hotel back at his apartment, and he took him to McDonald's. He went the other way.
For 30 years, I did that. For 30 years, I did that. And I told them basically, listen, if it's above your pay grade, don't worry about it. There's other people who can do this for you.
That's right.
Your job is to seal it in time. Stop the clock at the crime scene. Nothing moves, nothing's done. Photograph, document, shut it down. and then other people can come in and do it. Okay, it's no big deal.
Doesn't get any wiser than that.
Doesn't get wiser than that. But Vernon, don't you see cases, even, I always imagine people like you waking up in the morning reading your newspaper, right? And there are these cases, these amazing high profile cases, and you're sitting there having private opinions on them, right? As you're reading them. I imagine that a lot of times you read them and you think, what are they thinking? What? It's nonsense. The way that they handle this is ridiculous.
Yeah, I don't like to be in that position. I'd rather just read the paper.
Right. But I can't imagine.
I have enough. Listen, guys, I have enough cases on my head that I don't need any more trouble. All right. Like I said to you earlier, with all this information, I hope I never get a head injury, because I don't know where those devils are going to go, but they're going to make people crazy.
What, when it's time to pass on and go through the veil, can you imagine how many folks are going to be waiting for you to give you a hug?
Oh, I hope the main guy is there to give me a hug.
Well, I have been honored to have you here sharing your wealth of knowledge. And this is the book, ladies and gentlemen, that you have to go get. It's going to be in the link below. It is The Godfather of Homicide, and it's about Vernon's life. And he's a very humble, religious gentleman that has made the difference not only in my life, but I know in Dr. Brucato's life and tens of thousands of others' lives. He is a cop's cop. That's what it says here. And he is. There's no question about it. Vernon, thank you very, very much, sir, for coming on this program. And
it was a wonderful experience to be invited on. This is the first podcast I've ever done, and I hope it works with this $27 headgear that takes the place of my hair. But no, I appreciate the opportunity, and once again, I did that book as a legacy book because I wanted to leave something behind, and I thank you for the opportunity to do that. So thank you very much, Gary and Chris.
Hard working every day, I'm stressed out 24/7, babe. No timeouts, wish we could fly away. You and I go to our favorite place. Oh yeah, make special memories together. I'll be your company now and forever. I say we fly away, you and me, go to our favorite place. Feeling the sun on my face in Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. I need a summer breeze, some fresh air to put my mind at ease. No cares. You wanna come with me? Me and you go to our favorite tree. Are you ready now? We jump on a plane now. We're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away. Don't hesitate now. We're taking away. Yeah, we're taking away. We'll never come down. We're going away. Yeah, we're going away. You and me. Feeling the sun on my face in a way.